We will not go in any order that makes sense. Makes sense to us. Or it's a hard sense. We decided what organically emerges from the group. And so let me just first introduce the people in the order they will speak. So first, a big welcome to Emerita Professor Arisika Razak, that was the former chair of the Human Spirituality Program at the California Institute for Integral Studies in San Francisco. We had a long relationship with great people from the Institute. It's great to have you here. Then we have the Reverend Sofia Betancourt, that is many things. And among them, the Assistant Professor of Unitarian Universalist Theology and Ethics at Starr King Symposium for the Ministry at the GTU. Thank you, Sophia, for being here. Then we have Reverend Dr. Liza Rankow, that, as you know, is an interfaith minister and the founding director of One Life Institute in Oakland, California, and also a very beloved teacher at Starr King. Has been a very long time adjunct at Starr King. So thank you and welcome here. And then a great welcome to a former classmate of mine too, the Reverend Dr. Cynthia Moe-Lobeda, that is Professor of Theological and Social Ethics at Pacific and Lutheran Theological School and the Church Divinity School of the Pacific at the GTU. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have all of you. In terms of process, we decided that each person will have 8-10 minutes to bring up feedback generated by our presentation this morning. They might have different formats. Some are more biological, some more formal. After that, we welcome back Dr. Harris, that decided to sit there for the time, but then we'll come here, and she will start a dialogue with us in light of what was brought up. And we'll have 15 minutes or so of this dialogue. And then we'll have sort of an open mic. Not everyone will get there, but time to have more dialogue and questions and back and forth with the audience. So that's the process. So, thank you. And now, Arisika.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
At the risk of taking a little time off my prepared remarks, I'd just like to invite you to take a deep breath in and let it out. Feel the temperature of the air. Feel your feet on the floor and your sits bones on the chair or cushion. Notice the body. Notice the breath flowing in the body, the ease of breathing, the difficulty of breathing. Notice the weight of the hands on the lap, resting on the body. Take a breath in, let it out, and acknowledging all the difficulties that flesh is heir to. Thank you, body. This body got you up this morning. It brought you here. It is the body that met the breath of air as you emerged from your mother's body. This breath will stay with you all the days of your life. This heartbeat, which perhaps you can feel and perhaps not, will accompany all of your life. This morning, the earth did not shrug us off. So feel in your heart, in your mind's eye, your heart's eye, your gut's eye. Let some appreciation for your earth body come into your heart. Let some appreciation for the earth. Earth is the mother at whose breast we suck always. Let some appreciation for the earth, for this time of turbulence and change, for this time of losing species, perhaps our own. Breathe in, breathe out, as human beings have always done. Today, impelled by Melody's discussion of eco-memory and the comment of Reverend Rosemary Brady-Patrick, I want to talk a little bit about my own eco-autobiography. I, too, am someone raised in the North. I don't have direct memories of going down south, back home. My mother left Baltimore in the 1930s, in her 20s, fleeing segregation, poverty, colorism. She went to New York and never looked back. Estranged from her family, I grew up in a nuclear, single, mother-headed household. My father was an undocumented immigrant from Belize, but they separated early, and I don't have stories of his mother country. I grew up in concrete canyons, 20-foot tall buildings, projects, and tenement housing. When I was 16, and someone told me that if you dug up the concrete, there was earth underneath, I had to think about that concept. I was a senior in high school, but it didn't make sense to me. But I still grew up, even though we were very nominally Christians. We went to church on Easter Sunday. But I still grew up surrounded by Spirit. It wasn't the Holy Spirit of the church. It was a spirit of rocks and trees, water and sunlight. I was homeschooled, and I found Spirit in the playground. My little legs pumping the swing higher and higher. I found Spirit in soft spring rains and the movement of leaves on trees. I heard Spirit in the music of storefront Pentecostal churches, in the Harlem Mennonite Mission, and the songs of our picket lines in the North. As I grew older, I found Spirit in the writings of Walt Whitman and James Baldwin, in the singing of Aretha Franklin, Mary McKeeva, and later on in the poetry of Ntozake Shange, Sonia Sanchez, and Langston Hughes. Yes. I found Spirit in the oratory of Malcolm X, and it's been my great sorrow. When Obama was elected, I wanted him to speak like Malcolm. He speaks like Obama. I found in the Black Power movement, I found Spirit in the newly established Yoruba Temple in Harlem. And as I emerged from adolescence, I found Spirit in the practice and engagement of loving consensual sexuality. It is this lineage of art, activism, and embodiment that led me to Spirit. And it is the intersectionality of my experience that informs my claims to Ecowomanism. While Harris and many other womanists come to Ecowomanism grounded in the practical, explicit, and complex connections between African Americans and the lands they worked in the South, my claim to Ecowomanism as a Black, urban, cisgendered female emerges from deep grounding in the female body, including 2 decades working as an inner-city midwife. As a person who identifies as spiritual rather than religious, my claim to Ecowomanism is based in a mystical spirituality that I believe predates the advent of organized religion. It emerges from our primal human connection to the planet, from our biological kinship with all sentient life, and for me, in the profound and transformative experience of carrying, laboring, and birthing a child. It is this innate and instinctive earth-based spirituality that led me to a dream of the country of my womb, a concept I'd never heard of till it came to me in a dream. I felt the connection between the blossoming trees in the Santa Cruz Mountains, living in a commune, and my own desire to ripen and become fertile. While the work of white feminists like Susan Griffin, Barbara Ehrenreich, and Deirdre English made explicit connection between the so-called age of reason, the European witch burnings, and the patriarchal mistreatment of women and women's bodies. It was my work in the county hospital with poor and immigrant women of color that led to a grounded understanding between the links between the mistreatment of women, particularly Black women and other women of color, and the mistreatment of the earth. The womanist intersectional analysis, both deconstructive and constructive, that Harris presents has not always been a part of Christianity. As Alice Walker writes in her essay, the only reason you want to go to heaven is that you have been driven out of your mind, off your land, and out of your lover's arms. It is fatal to love a God who does not love you. A God specifically created to comfort, lead, advise, strengthen, and enlarge the tribal borders of someone else. We have been beggars at the table of a religion that sanctioned our destruction. Our own religions denied, forgotten, our own ancestral connections to all creation, something of which we are ashamed. I maintain that we are empty, lonely, without our pagan heathen ancestors, that we must lively them up within ourselves and begin to see them as whole and necessary and correct. Their earth-centered, female-reverencing religions, like their architecture, agriculture, and music, suited perfectly to the lives they led. End quote. I would like to suggest that opening to the fullness of this vision allows us to examine the non-Christian beliefs that are both native to this continent and rooted in the spirituality of the enslaved African who came here. Earth-based, female-reverencing, animist and polytheistic worship is a subterranean ocean that runs beneath the mighty rivers of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And Ecowomanism, in its broadest interpretation, speaks to those rivers and that ocean. One of my friends who has Indigenous elders talks about the 3 R's. She talks about our living in a world in which we are in relation to all of creation. She talks about the respect that is due to the entities that live in this world. And she talks about reciprocity, the notion that what we do comes back to us. It is no surprise to Indigenous people that if we pollute the water or the air, that will come back to us. Our Yoruba proverb says, if you shit on the road, do not be surprised to find flies on your return. And I use the term because in some languages there are not 2 words for the body. I want to just, 2 minutes. I want to speak to the fact that eco-memory is accessible whether we are religious or whether we are not. In claiming an eclectic, earth-based, woman-centric spirituality, I stand in a long tradition of African American women. Whether they were allowed to preach or prophesize, there were always women who went into the forest, who heard the voice of God, as Rebecca Cox did in the thunderstorms, who came back with healing herbs, who ministered to their community, whether it was allowed or not. I want to say that eco-memory exists in Africa, where in spite of enforced Christianity and the loss and severing from African traditional religions, people still remember. Wangari Maathai says that as a child, when she went to gather firewood, her mother said, "Do not pick the wood of the fig tree. We do not burn it. We do not cut it. We do not gather it." And she didn't know why. She asked her mother why. And her mother said, "It is the tree of God." When Maathai became a scientist, she discovered that where the fig tree grows, its roots break down the rocky layer and goes into the water table. Where the fig tree grows, streams emerge. And when the fig trees are cut down, we lose those streams. There is drought and soil erosion. Eco-memory is accessible to all of us. If we have a body, we are part of the living web of the universe. I want to close with her blue body because for me, partly as a mother and partly as a woman, I so resonate with this poem. This is by Alice Walker, we have a beautiful mother. Her hills are buffalo, her buffalo hills. We have a beautiful mother. Her oceans are wombs, her wombs, oceans. We have a beautiful mother. Her teeth, the white stone at the edge of the water. The summer grasses, her plentiful hair. We have a beautiful mother. Her green lap immense. Her brown embrace eternal. Her blue body, everything we know. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Reverend Sofia Betancourt.
I want to begin with real gratitude to Dr. Melanie Harris. Not just for setting a foundation that creates space, as a fig tree creates space, for the work that will not build on yours, but dance with yours in the Womanist Dancing Mind, but also for embodying womanist values in how you move through the world. You have supported me in ways that almost no other scholar has. Simply for valuing my voice, and I could not be more grateful to you. Gratitude, gratitude. I want to say that a very small piece of my eco-autobiography is gratitude to grandmothers whose everyday expression of faithful connection to land very much shaped my early, precocious self-understanding. I'm thinking of Sofia Betancourt, my Chilean grandmother, who taught me to collect the corms of eucalyptus trees and to put them under my pillow at night when I was sick. And it wasn't just that it was comforting. This wasn't the capitalist world where we put the scent of Vicks into your Kleenex so you think you might feel better. That exists. My grandmother taught me that if I would stop even not feeling well, by the trees and pick up corns, I could heal myself. I'm thinking of Carmen Linton Holt, who never spoke to me about family being broader than the humans among us, but who spent as much time cooking for her dogs as she did cooking for the rest of us. They had handmade food just like us. And I remember the day a canary flew into her house, which I talk about sometimes, actually, weirdly, at academic conferences, because it stuck with me. And the thing she said was she sent me to the kitchen to find a pepper, to pull the top out, because those seeds were the part of our food that the bird could eat. Family. In Latinx cultures, family and food are just indivisible. So actually, I want to talk about hard-won hope, and I'm so grateful for that phrase. I come out of a program in environmental ethics, where I was really blessed to work actually with Willis Jenkins, who is a cisgender straight white man who lives in the intersections and works to be in that dancing dialogue. And he has this idea of moral incompetence, which I value. He says that our ideas about religion, faith, and spirituality were created in a time when we could not imagine the Anthropocene, where it was beyond the imagination, beyond even our most sacred, spirit-driven knowing, that humans could be powerful enough to change the course of geological history. So that when we as religious leaders and scholars and teachers and thinkers try to mine the mother lode, try to come to our own spiritual teachings to address climate disruption, those teachings were formed in a time when we did not know the extent of our own power. And he says we are in a state of moral incompetence. And I appreciate that framework, even though my immediate pushback, still precocious, is to say that womanist work provides a different inroad into the question itself. Right? I understand ecowomanism as that which gathers knowledge that's not limited to a Western, patriarchal, settler, colonial worldview. And that comes from this survival reality that has survived the unimaginable. If you were not supposed to live, and yet your people not only survived, they passed on teachings of beauty, as Alice Walker would remind us, when we didn't have any to remind us. Right? When there was no beauty to remind us of the power of beauty, our mothers taught their children, who taught their children, who taught their children long enough that when we could plant seeds again of our own choosing, we remembered blooming roses, Dr. Harris, like yours. Right? So how do we move from this imagining, this knowledge that religion and spirituality offers us tools for survival? Yes. But to move from that sense of survival to a knowledge that can change our behavior in response to our environmental commitments. Because the problem is that survival isn't necessarily healing. It's not necessarily lamentation or restitution or new knowing. It is survival, which is a revolutionary act, as our elders have taught us, right? But for me, in these times, in my own tradition, this is a question of gathering the droplets of universalism across peoples and movements and ancestries, because I believe in a sacred love that will not let us go. I believe and I insist that we can always find some way to move to forgiveness, to restitution, if we do that work of lamentation. Thank you for starting us in hush. Of reparations and that evolution of self that's required to make real change, right? I believe in the all-embracing love of a polyphonic, mystical, brown-bodied, immense, glorious God who also needs us to step up and do more. And so, Dr. Harris, yes, I do believe that God is merciful enough and our ancestors are wise enough to offer us another chance, right? And that hard-won hope might come from those everyday commitments. But I'm in a tradition that I think is mourning its standard of hope right now. Because every day we say, how are we supposed to preach hopefulness in these times? As if hope were an attitude rather than a spiritual discipline. Hard-won hope. Hard-won hope. Your mother who swallowed her tears to tell you what cotton was. Hard-won hope. And it needs to be broader. I'm thinking of the question that Sherry Prudhomme asked earlier. What happens when our language is itself colonized and we're not even allowed to use the words that might elevate that hope into something that changes behavior? In our school, because we learned from Ibrahim Baba, we talk about organic multireligiosity. Right, that he wrote interrupts practices of considering religions as monolithic, as rigidly separated traditions in conflict with one another, and understands them instead as having complex and constantly morphing relationships in successive generations and in every widening geographical and cultural contexts. This matters to me because it tells us that we can gain knowledge from multiple places, right? So when I am moved by an African indigenous tradition that reminds me that how I use seeds in my household is part of authentic relationship and community, I don't have to justify this to my Unitarian Universalist worldview that might think something different. Right, that our epistemologies, the way we create new knowledge, is actually larger than the human institutions we rely on to pass that knowledge amongst the generations. So I love, Dr. Harris, in your work that you bring us back to Levi Uniparian's explanation of life systems. Something larger than religion, larger than the distinction between religion and spirituality, and dare I add, magic and witchcraft and conjure. Okay? That says that these institutions are larger than those things, but not constrained by them. Right? She writes that the concept of life systems is useful because it allows us to begin imagining how a global network of people who share nothing more than a common thought architecture about spirituality might collectively influence the shape of human society and life on planet Earth merely by the power of their ideas. I want an eco-womanism that is larger than one faith tradition. I want an eco-womanism whose contemplative practices are an embodiment of the organic multi-religiosity that we teach here. I don't want interfaith politeness. I don't even want spiritual literacy. I want there to be room for the silenced voices of our ancestors to be larger than the religions that were also used to enslave. Come on. Hope is hard won. I would ask you to be more hopeful in the days of Trump than the days of Obama. Yes. Because our faith asks us to. It's not about being cheery or happy. It's about knowing that fig trees are stronger than rock. It's about knowing that, yes, the trees may be complicit in lynching, but that the trees themselves were also lynched. Yes. It is about finding co-conspirators in all of God's creation to bring us back to a mercy that is, yes, still possible.
The first step of eco-womanist method. My generational eco-memory includes grandparents who immigrated to the U.S. in the early part of the 20th century, each from a different country. Most had been raised as subsistence farmers who survived by growing the food for their families and sharing support among neighbors. They left their home countries in search of economic opportunity, and in the case of my paternal grandfather, to escape the persecution of the pogroms. Eventually, each of them settled in the northeastern United States, New York and Massachusetts. And like others who have spoken on today, my own eco-story is rooted in the concrete and asphalt of New York City. But even there were trees, and there was grass, and there were clovers that we used to tie together into chains sitting in the park, and dandelions that we could make wishes on. And not far from one place where we lived was the Hudson River. The summer I turned 10, we moved to suburbia, which seemed to me like the deep woods. I found refuge following a creek to a wooded place hidden from sight. Sheltered by trees and surrounded by skunk cabbage. I would sit for hours listening to the earth, the water, the wind. My mother planted a small vegetable patch, and I tasted raw peas for the first time, right from the vine, each sweet green pearl pulled from the pod by my 10-year-old hands. The idea that food came from the earth, from your yard, right, was a complete revelation. It was magic to me. As a city, canned food came from the store, right? From cans or those little square freezer box things with the white cardboard. It was magical to me. This idea of food and earth and the sweetness from the vine. Even today, my backyard gardens, however small, are my sacred sanctuaries. And getting my hands in the dirt is my best therapy. My relationship with nature, and especially with the elements, the air, the fire, the water, the earth, and what I experience as the wise and loving intelligences within them, have become central to my spiritual life and practice, and often to my healing work with others. Nature offers profound spiritual medicine. Medicine especially needed in these times of layered daily and generational trauma, of deep despair, of pervading injustice, and of apocalyptic transformations. With her work, Dr. Harris has built a bridge between academic discourse and social activism, between structured theological method and the unbounded organic mysticism of nature, integrating mind, heart, spirit, earth. She has deepened the application of the original definitional principles of womanism, applying them to contemporary contexts of climate crisis and struggles for liberation. In a sense, she has put feet on these ideas and invited us all to go walking. And I'm very, very grateful. From here, I'm going to do a little, I guess it's jazz, right? In reflecting on both the readings and your marvelous offering on this morning, there are a few places where I particularly find resonance with my own work. And it is, as you suspected, Dr. Melanie, in chapter 4, in the areas of transformation and healing. It makes my heart so glad to see how in the academic world you have disrupted duality and invited the spirituality of interbeing into the conversation. That's the territory that I inhabit, what I call the mystic ethos or the mystic worldview. You use the words interdependence and interconnection, but I would take it a little farther and even dare to say oneness, right? But oneness is not sameness. And oneness is not an excuse for spiritual bypass in the work of justice. Right? We can't leapfrog over the very real issues of the day and say, well, we're all one, so it's all okay. Let's just go to the, it's all good. The ethos of oneness carries with it a just profound ethical demand, right? On all sides of the equation. So speaking as someone who's, the majority of my ancestors are from the European world, the liberation, not only in justice struggles, to transform oppression, is not just for the benefit of those who are being oppressed in society. We spoke of the rehumanization of the oppressed as necessary. But the oppressor, too, has lost their humanity. I mean, what condition of the soul would be required for someone to behave in the manner that my ancestors and the ancestors of many of us in this room have behaved for centuries? What do you have to kill inside yourself to perpetrate that level of harm? This world, oneness means everybody, including the most we don't like. How do we make peace? How do we wrestle with that? How do we find redemption for everybody in this very inconvenient oneness? It's nice to be one with the earth and the stars and the breath of the air, and that's what sustains me, is my feeling of oneness with the natural world, which is where I experience divinity most directly. But that sustenance is in service to wrestling with the oneness with all these MFs that I would really like to not do at all. So whichever side of the equation one may be on, you know, when you build a bridge, one side of the bridge may be sandy earth, and that requires a particular kind of foundation to be solid. The other side of the bridge may be mud, and that requires a different kind of preparation. And we tend to look at what the other people are doing. Well, they're not doing, I don't see anybody digging down into there to make it solid, so we think they're not doing their work. We all have work to do. Our work is unique to our position. Our work is unique. I hadn't thought about the bridge thing, but what earth are you planted in? What earth are you building in? What earth are you steeped in? Requires something of us and offers something to us. To do this work of liberation for all of us, we have to reach into something larger than ourselves. And that, to me, is where nature, spirit, life, ancestors, and the collective body of being are what saves us, or what sustains us, or what guides us. So.
Thank you, all three of you. Those were amazing comments. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Harris, for your brilliant capacity to wed sharp intellectual engagement with utterly life-giving spiritual food and activism. Yes. I would like to dedicate my comments to the ongoing impact of the renowned and recently passed womanist ethicist, Reverend Dr. Katie Cannon. And also dedicate my comments to the health and well-being of Dr. Harris' new son, John Asante. Yes. In accord with ecofeminist methodology taught by Dr. Harris, I too will speak first from the heart, grounded in our shared experience. Some days ago, in correspondence about this panel, Dr. Harris wrote to me, perhaps, I quote, "Perhaps your reflection can come from the spirit of sisterhood we share and have shared on this journey. Please feel free to even share about some of our deep connections in prayer and how you served as a pivotal mentor, friend, and colleague to me to write. End quote. So, as a result of Dr. Harris' request a few years ago that I serve her as a writing mentor, we got to know each other much better. And in that process, I learned from her many invaluable gems. 3 of them that were truly life-giving and life-shaping for me are elements of eco-womanist practice. And I'll note those 3 and then mention some elements of eco-feminist method. The first of those 3 pertains to anyone who has been degraded or negated or abused by other people, or by society, or by oneself. I count myself amongst those people, and I imagine many of you do also. What I learned from Melanie is that we are called to love ourselves deeply and actively. The great womanist ethicist Emily Towns, who is also one of Melanie's teachers, says it well. We are called to claim as our primary identity, I am beloved, and so is everyone else. This, Towns writes, is, I quote, not an act of individualistic nihilism, but rather is an individual and communal act of resistance to the radical nature of oppression and devaluation of the self and the community by structural evil. End quote.
Yes, yes.
For ecowomanism, as practiced by Melanie Harris, this means an enduring commitment not only to take care of oneself, but also to share in mutual, deep-seated, honest, encouraging, enduring commitment to cultivate self-care in one another. Secondly, Dr. Harris taught me through experience the power of prayer for eco-womanists who are situated, at least in Christian traditions. I'll tell you, our phone sessions about writing ended in Dr. Harris asking if she could pray over me. Well, I'm a Lutheran, and we actually don't talk about praying over. So, and I thought, at first, pray my phone? Come on. Well, never in my life have I felt so profoundly prayed for in every cell of my being, and it has been life-shaping for me. Third, and we have mentioned this, she taught and modeled the value of hearing the ancestors, especially the ancestors whose memories and realities have been domesticated or ignored by the all-pervasive, distorting brutality of white supremacy, capitalist hegemony, and patriarchy. This means drawing upon the ancestors to support our liberative courage. And for white descendants of the colonial enterprise, it also means exposing and debunking the myths of the ancestors that continue to foment racial, economic, and gender-based violence. So these then are three gems of eco-womanist practice that Dr. Harris has modeled over the years. All three foster power. Power for the work of radical social transformation toward justice and ecological sanity. In our correspondence this week, Dr. Harris went on to say to me, again I quote, "Your method is truly inspiring, and I wonder if there is a way to share this in connection with some of your reflections on ecowomanism." End quote. Method is indeed vital. How we do ethics determines its outcome. Therefore, method has life and death consequences. Time is short here, so I will not focus on my method, but on Dr. Harris' method as a cutting-edge face of eco-womanist ethics. And I select here 5 aspects of that that resonate with my own. First is an explicit purpose of eco-womanist ethics. It is the eradication of oppression in the lives of African-descended women, but also in the lives of all human beings and all of creation. Second is a presupposition. It is that the analytical categories and methods derived from white male experience cannot describe the lives of Black women or prescribe for them. The next element of method pertains to sources of moral wisdom. The primary source for eco-womanist ethics is African and African American women's lived experience, including practiced spiritual and theological traditions, histories of oppression, and keen intellectual engagement. This constitutes a radical epistemological shift in the discipline of ethics, in the academy more broadly, and in this society. And it is a shift that has life-saving import. The fourth element of method that she develops is a fervent commitment to unearth and reveal what is really going on in the structures that shape our society around the lines of white supremacy and Earth's degradation. Jean Emily Towns names this task with riveting power. It is the work to, again I quote, expose that this society has been dining on a meal of destruction and violence that consists of the bones of Black and brown people. End quote. An example of this methodological mandate in Dr. Harris' work is her commitment to unearth the links between racial violence in U.S. history and ecological violence. She employs many tools for that unmasking. Particularly striking is the tool that she terms eco-memory, that has obviously moved all of us. It is a form of what Katie Cannon calls counter-memory, to correct the meta-narratives that ignore the role and voice of Black people and Native American people in the environmental movement. Finally, in this account of eco-womanist method is the embodiment of hope in communal liberative action. Hope fed by relationships of daring honesty and tenacious courage. Hope born of action and mutually empowering relationships defies all forces that would thwart God's gift of abundant life for all. So these 5 key elements of method in eco-womanist ethics, developed and articulated by Professor Harris, offer invaluable guidance for the doing of all ethics, not only eco-feminist ethics, especially now, in this crucible moment in human history when humankind hovers on a precipice carved out by climate change and what I have come to call climate racism and climate colonialism. The vast gap between those who have caused the climate catastrophe and those who suffer first and foremost from it. Disproportionately, people of low economic income and people of color. Eco-womanist ethics, with Dr. Harris as one of its foremost teachers, offers brilliantly powerful insights and tools for meeting the unprecedented crisis of our time. For this, to Reverend Dr. Melanie Harris, we owe profound gratitude.
Thank you to all of the panelists. Now we have some time for some dialogue between Dr. Harris and the panelists. Then we follow from some questions from the audience. And since surprisingly we started just a tiny bit later, we might play around a little bit with that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. For the rivers of these women, we give thanks. For the charting of the many ways and passages that your lives are in now, have been in, for the ways that they have brought you all to this beautiful ocean in which we all share. I am so grateful. Thank you for giving birth to yourselves and to me and into this work. Thank you for sacrificing to be here, to teach, to heal, to live and write, and to be. Thank you. Wow. Oh, how beautiful. Ecowomanism was born again today. This is an extraordinary panel. I am so grateful to each of the panelists. Thank you so much for your reflections. I want to share my gratitude and share some comments, but certainly leave most of the time for our open conversation. I do want to give thanks so much to my mother, Reverend Dr. Melanie Harris, for giving birth to me, but to also embody today, so many grandmothers and ancestors, and I'm so grateful to each of you all for beginning with that first step in a sense of that eco-womanist methodology, because I do think that it helps to shape and to bring a different kind of spirit and intrigue into academic discourse. I am always reminded of, I have a new being here. I must introduce you. Forgive me. This is John Asante, Arisika Harris. He's just sitting here waiting to be introduced. This is my son, who you see just on my belly here. He is also very grateful. He's quiet, which is nice. For a moment, but thank you for allowing me to bring him into this space. One of my mother's maternal grandmother, Mama Leela, is one who embodies so much of the spirituality that I heard echoed in the papers today so beautifully, which is a spirituality that pushes through, by, and sometimes touches in and dances with, but beyond Christianity. One of the gifts, I think, in each of the papers was the reminder that this, as you said, this kind of cute interfaith dialogue is actually really not life-transforming. And it's not going to get us further as far as we need to in terms of facing the crisis that we're in today. So I think that's an invitation for eco-womanism that was so brilliantly echoed in each of your papers, to really interrogate comparative theologies, to question and bring some really kind of living, critical heart to interfaith work, particularly around environmental justice. To look again, I was so grateful, Arisika, that you reminded us again of the breathing and the honoring of Native peoples and Native lands. The connection, certainly, to African and African American history and peoples, but certainly Native peoples throughout this landmass, but then also throughout the globe. I think that's a space where eco-womanism can deepen a little bit more. I have always been so encouraged by goddess traditions and Celtic goddess traditions. And I think at first that's all I thought existed for women, before I too knew the beautiful name Katie Cannon. So thank you for reminding us of her ancestral spirit with us today. There is something very important about challenging even the ways that goddess tradition has, in some sense, left out women of color. And Arisika, I'm so grateful for your words that reminded us, no, this goes way back to the continent of Africa and beyond. There's some work there we need to do, some archival work and research there. I think that's an invitation. Liza is a healer, and I'm so grateful to you for your work. I know your work well for Howard Thurman and One Life, I was so grateful for you for reminding us again about the charge we have to remember, follow fairness, reminder that it is not just those who are oppressed that are in the healing process. It is those who have oppressed, the oppressors that are also in the healing process. That speaks profoundly to the importance of oneness and the challenge in front of us. I want to say, Sofia, you're just brilliant. You're just brilliant. I'm so grateful that you all are blessed with a gift in her. Goodness gracious, you really are. I remember when the first conversations began happening and how deeply in prayer you were, and how many of us were like, all right, Starr King, you better come with it now. The South listening. You better take care of her. If she's going there, you better take care of her. And I am so grateful that you are here. May your work and your prophetic voice continue to deepen in this place, but also speak so much more broadly. And I'm excited. I'm excited. I will plant the seed and then say a word about sisterhood. This is a book. This is a book, and it's more than a book. It is a book. And on the way towards tenure, I do hope, Sister Sophia, that you will consider allowing these words to mesh in beauty and poetry with your own. Cynthia and I have been on the journey of writing for a long time, and I am so grateful as a white woman and one who is perceived and is white, particularly in the academy. It's Cynthia's work that has really challenged white supremacy from within. And I'm so grateful for the hard work that it takes to do that. But I really appreciate you pushing me as a scholar, but then also pushing the conversation to interrogate white supremacy always as a white person. That matters. That matters a lot. And Gabriella, thank you for being the dean of faculty. So excited. Over the years, it's been so wonderful to see that our work is in good hands. Caring hands that care about how thesis statements are written. Hands that care about how faculty are treated, hands that care about people's lives. I'm so grateful for the care and for the love that's been poured into this work. May the work and the struggle and the life continue. Indeed. I do want to give thanks for Alice Walker. She has brought so many of us together. So I do want to give thanks for her. And she is a mother to so many of us, and I think her words continue to inspire so much of this work, and so may her life also, and her energy, and her honor continue to be celebrated. Thank you.
Well, we're a little late, but we have some time for a little conversation. I wonder first if there is anything anyone on the panel still feels really pressed to say. Yes.
One of the things that I wanted to say, and again, not to universalize African traditional religion, but similarly, Yoruba, many of the deities are simultaneously elemental powers, natural forces, sacred ancestors. Oshun, for example, is the river that flows to Oshogbo. She is the sacred grove. If you want to, as Oshogbo was settled with her permission, and if you want to enjoy prosperity, you have to respect her not only as a deity, but as an ecological force of nature. And so in many, and while this is an example specific to the Yoruba, and things are slightly different, the notion in many indigenous groups is that we live in this world that we share with other beings, some of whom are more powerful than us, some of whom, all of whom, we owe respect to. And those beings and elements sometimes are moved to interact on behalf of humans. And so when we go to many indigenous religions, and all of our people, everyone in this room, is descended from people who lived on the land, who survived because they understood the ways of the land, because they made covenants between the plant people and the sacred sites. All of that is deeply wrapped up in a vision of the world, of an ensouled universe. And being aware of that and seeing how that has been updated over millennia is something that is of benefit to all. Not that we steal traditions, not that we appropriate them, not that we take them half-assed and half-baked, but that we understand this is not the way it always was.
I want to say just really briefly that I want to make this plea into Ecowomanist method, that we name our island kin explicitly. Right? You have in your writing, and you echoed today that we're talking about wisdom drawn from African and African American peoples. And yet we know that somewhere between 93 and 97% of the folks viciously kidnapped from the continent of Africa never made it to this land mass. And it's not that I don't consider my ancestors included in that definition. It's that their particularity offers something really important. Right? There is a creolization attached to survival, attached to meaning-making, attached to learning new relationships to land and ecological knowledge, right? That comes from having to transcend the barriers of language and culture and religion in the face of the unimaginable that happens in the islands. I'm going to say in the West Indies, even though I know that history is complicated, but my family identifies as West Indian. What are you going to do? But just, that this is real. And I think that by naming that liminal space that became then homeland is not only important for that wisdom, but it's also important because we're losing the islands first.
Yes.
So they are directly in the path of the storm and have survived the unimaginable by creating something new without losing who we were. And we need to name it to learn.
There's nothing else on the table. I will ask Shannon Alexander, that I have the privilege to have as my assistant and guide to move around in the room and take some questions. We have about 10 minutes. Oh, I see someone in the back there. Okay, I see. Ian, and then maybe Tucker in the back. Yeah, Ian.
Thank you all so much for everything that you have said, and thank you so much, Dr. Melanie, for all that is you. I can't even think of ways to put it. And I'm so grateful that your mother is in the space. It just means a lot to me, being someone who really values mothers in general. So I'm so glad that you're here. Arisika used words that framed the fig tree as sacred. And then Reverend Sofia called the concept that Dr. Melanie brought up, and reminding us that the fig tree was also lynched. And I appreciate this framing because it brought to mind a biblical story when Jesus cursed the fig tree that didn't bear fruit. And this is relevant to me in this conversation because as a queer, Black, gender fluid being, I have felt like the sacred fig tree that has been lynched by white supremacist culture and cursed by my Christian family before I had the opportunity to bear fruit, as some of y'all were here to, witness in my writing. And so all of this has felt like the lynching and the curse has felt kind of like the concrete above the earth that also Arisika mentioned. And my question is, after doing my own work of digging up the concrete so that I can touch the earth that is me, I found that I don't know that I have the energy to assist other people in digging up their concrete, and I worry that it might interfere with my efforts of ministry. And so I'm wondering what kind of advice or feedback that either you, Dr. Melanie, or anyone on the panel might have for doing this work in ministry and helping or not people dig up the concrete that is preventing them from touching earth.
I think that one thing I want to say to that is to look at the metaphor of seasons, the metaphor and the reality. There are times we need to rest. There are times we need to pull back. There are times we can give freely from a very full place. There are times we lead and support because it is a time of crisis, because we are fleeing. And I think, and what's just coming to mind is true self-love and true patience, that this will unfold. And that I think we're all called to do our excavation. And we're also called to find the sources of renewal that will hold us together. And I think that's what I want to say. Find those sources. Be patient. Heed the messages of, I can't do this right now. We don't want you to burn out before you even started. And I remember somebody asking Eldridge, and she said, we need a 500-year plan. So, and if there are many religions that talk about that we have many lifetimes. That may or may not be your belief, but to treat yourself gently and with honor, and trust the intentionality of your heart, because that will lead you in the right direction.
If I can add a bit as well. The language that you used, Ian, about helping other people dig up their concrete, there's a very real sense where we can only do our own, and that each of us must do our own in order to become the fullness. You spoke so eloquently about who you gave birth to in yourself through the process of your own excavations. And one, if you're doing pastoral counseling with people, they will want you to dig it up for them. It's not your job. And not only is it not your job, but it's not doing anybody a favor. Aside from, I really don't think anybody can do it for you but you. But what we can do is be the midwives for your process. We can hold space with love. We can offer coaching and breathe with them, right? To love people into their own excavations. Yes. But the burnout factor is very different when you're trying to actually break somebody's concrete versus you're loving them and holding them and offering whatever word Spirit gives you to guide. One is exhausting and futile, and the other, actually, you will be nourished as you hold space because you're tapped into the larger thing. right? We're not doing it from ourselves, if we're doing it where what I would call right. But we are open to the ancestral realm, to the larger forces of life, to the divine, and bringing that through. So our job is to hone ourselves as the instrument that can be the clearest channel possible for whatever is needed in that moment of companioning others on their journey. And you'll find that much more sustainable practice as well.
Also, Ian, really quickly, I think that some of us live in identities where we are expected to excavate someone else's concrete at the cost of our own life and living. And refusing is a revolutionary act. And that doesn't mean we aren't called to be pastors. And when that line gets confusing, find a friend. Seriously, it will save your life. And they need you.
I would only add that as in my experience, healing, the spirit of healing does come through one another. And there are a couple of images that I have found enormously useful, and one is to surround myself and encourage others to do the same with like a shield of protective guardians who are ancestors. So I have my dead mother, and I have my grandmothers, and I have Jesus, and I have someone that surround me and ward off the arrows that come. They deflect the arrows that come. And that's an image that has been powerful to me. And then two images that actually come from Dr. Harris. And one of them is the image of a cloak, covering oneself, enabling oneself to be embraced by the cloak of beloved, of being wear the garb of beloved. And the other was something that she once said to me, and that is, you bear within you the thread of self-love that can reweave a kind of life that honors the self in the midst of all that would come and degrade and beat down the self. So I thank you for those images. They're in my journal.
I would say rest. Rest is often take Sabbath, which is important. I think often in ministry, I learned this at Union. We are of the class who came as bright seminarians and students ready for doctoral work about September 8th in 2001. And those of us who knew nothing of New York headed straight to ground zero by 3 o'clock, September 11th, 2001. In part because we felt called. And many of us were challenged beyond our imagination and beyond our skill. And so it was wise professors and teachers and advisors who said, do you know what burnout looks like? This is what it is. Everyone in seminary, go into therapy. Yes. Katie Cannon made that so clear. And for those of us who came in around that time, and Emily Towns wrote our prescriptions. And I do believe that paying attention to mental health and being aware of the places of depression, for those of us who, when we got to that point, we educated ourselves, and then we educated each other, and then we held each other accountable, and then we studied, and then we ministered. But only after getting therapy, developing a self-care plan. I think it's one of the most important things that one can do to learn how to take Sabbath and learn how to take care of oneself.
Before we do the workshop, but with very deep thankfulness to everyone in this panel and to Dr. Thank you. jogging.